Good morning. I'm Pastor Chris. It is a pleasure to be with you today and given the message. And I'll start you out with a story. A lot of you know that we used to live in Pittsburgh before we moved out here. And a lot of times we'd have to travel through Pittsburgh to come to New Jersey to visit. And one of these times we are driving through Pittsburgh. We get to the other side of Pittsburgh and we get a message on our phone, both my wife, Nikki, and I get this message, and it said, tornado warning, seek shelter. So at that exact time, we look up and see next exit, 20 miles on the PA Turnpike. Okay, let's look for a bridge. Because what do you do in this situation? But you know what? It doesn't matter. We always get these messages. It usually never comes that there's a tornado, right? Never usually happens. And so we're looking for a bridge. There's no bridges. It's western PA. There's just nothing. There's farms and stuff. And then we turn around the corner and we see this. That's the actual picture. What do you do in that situation? You're driving down the turnpike, and you see that. And actually, there was more of a funnel. That was like the start of, and we're just like, we're gonna die. And so there was a lot of different reactions in the car. My daughter was 6 at the time. She was totally asleep. My son was 3, and he's like, what's that? Totally excited. My wife is a counselor. She is going through her breathing exercises that she teaches people because there was a panic attack happening. I was acting like this doesn't bother me. Everything is calm. This is cool because I'm going to keep the cool in the car. But inside, I'm like, we are going to die right now. And so what do? There's no bridges. You're looking around, and there's no exits. What are you going to do? And so I said, this is like a movie. This is like a movie. I'm going to outrun the tornado. And so I just hit the gas. I mean, what cop is going to pull you over when there's a tornado bearing down on you? And just blew past it. It was on the left side of the road, and we just blew past the tornado. And this is a real story, and it took us a while to settle down. We just almost died. And it was the scared most scared I ever was in my life, thinking that was it. That was it. And it was at the same time that I read a book by a guy named Erwin McManus, and it was about not settling for average, not settling for less than in faith and life. It was called The Last Arrow. This guy, Erwin McManus, and we don't know how much we have left to live on this earth. I mean, if a tornado can just come out of nowhere, right? We don't know how many days, how much time we have left. Are we living a life that is to the full? Are we living it with all of what we can do? Our passage that comes to us today, that I'm going to preach from, is an obscure passage. If you've been coming to church your whole life and hearing sermons, I can almost guarantee that you've never heard a sermon on this passage, all right? It's obscure. It comes from the book of Kings. And let me give you a little bit of heads up about the book of Kings. It looks a little bit like Game of Thrones. If you've ever heard of Game of Thrones, if not, don't look it up. So the Game of Thrones is like kings after each other, kingdoms after each other, and Kings starts looking like that. And it comes after a time where we have that Saul was the first king, okay? King David, you might have heard of King David. King David was always seen as the best king, right? He's the best, and all kings are always measured to the of King David, if they're good enough, if they were like King David. And then we have Solomon, who's like the second best king. He did some cool stuff. He built a temple, but he had a backslide, and he kind of did some weird stuff in his later life. But then after Solomon, we have kings that keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And what happens is next is that the kingdom of Israel actually splits into Judah and Israel. Like there's a civil war. And so we got all these kings. That's a lot of kings that all were just going farther and farther and farther away from God. And this is what happens in this time of kings. And our area of focus today is on a king named Joash and his prophet named Elisha. Not Elijah. You've probably heard the name Elijah. This is Elisha. And Joash is coming to the side of a dying Elisha, a prophet that is dying, and he's weeping. And he's not weeping because his friend Elisha's dying. No, he's weeping because he's got a prophet that helps his army. And now that prophet is dying, he is terrified about what's going to happen. And so this is Joash at the bedside of the prophet Elisha. And so let's read that now. Here goes. Now Elijah had been suffering from the illness from which he died. Joash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows. And he did so. Take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. When he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared. You will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek. Then he said, take the arrows, and the king took them. Elisha told him, strike the ground. He struck the ground, struck it 3 times, and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. Elisha died and was buried. You may hear this and say, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It does. It literally makes no sense if you try to understand it. Elisha asked Joash to shoot an arrow through the east side window. He does it, right? Boom. Goes right through it. Victory. You got victory. You win. And then he says, strike the arrows against the ground, which he means like striking it like that. And he strikes the ground 3 times and then stops. Elisha gets mad and says, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Now you only defeat them 3 times, and that's it. I always scratch my head with this one. Why was 3 not enough? Like, 3's a good number, right? It's a good number. 3's a good number. It's not 1, it's not 2, 3. It's a solid number, right? But why did Elisha stop striking the ground? And why did Joash stop striking the ground? And why did Elisha say that 3 wasn't enough? Did Joash feel like 3 was enough? Maybe did he feel like it was dumb and pointless to do 4 and 5, that like 3 was enough? Like 1 is too little, 2 probably not enough, 3, good number, 4 or 5, kind of getting pointless here, right? Too much. I don't want to do too much. This leads to a question for us. Are you the type of person that would strike the ground 3 times, 1 and 2 wasn't enough, but 4 and 5 is too much? Are you the type of person that would do 3? Or are you the type of person that would keep going? 4, 5, 6, just keep going. I think we all fall into these categories somewhere, especially when it comes to our faith. Let me give you a little bit of insight to me, your pastor. Next one. I am average. I'm an average Joe. Like many of you, you're average. My whole life, I have been average. Like I thrived off being average. I actually like being average. I don't know about you. In grade school, I did just enough to get by and not get noticed. When I was a teacher, I did the same thing. Do enough to get by, don't get noticed, right? Seminary, same thing. Do enough to get by, don't get noticed. I called it going under the radar, right? It's a term that I love, a term that I always did. In school, from high school to undergrad to seminary, I always was a B, like B+ student right in there, right under the radar. I liked being average. In fact, when I was an undergrad, I had some learning disabilities growing up, and it took me a while to learn how to read and write well. And so I had a friend of mine help me with writing a paper. And in the class, they said, okay, if you do this topic, you can get an A. If you do this topic, you can get a B. If you do this topic, you can get a C, which is a weird way to grade papers. But anyway, so I was like, oh, yeah, of course. I'll do the B one. And my friend, who was a really good writer that was teaching me how to write and was like, why are you choosing the B one? Do you want to do more, right? I'm like, no. I'm a B guy. I write B papers, so I pick the B topic. That's the way it works around here, the B paper. And they're like, I don't understand that, but okay, I'll help you, whatever. For a lot of us, average is the safer choice. It's the path of least resistance. If we go beyond that, there is a chance that we could fail and then look like an idiot. My whole life, I stopped short of failing and looking like an idiot. So I called it going under the radar, because I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to look like an idiot. I was afraid. I was afraid to fail. If I was Joe Hash, I would have struck it 3 times, dead on. 4 or 5, too much. Could fail there. I believe in our faith, we settle for just enough. I can do just enough. I believe we should raise our standards of our faith, of our sacrifice, that our expectations of ourselves, we need to raise those, our belief that in the goodness and the generosity of God. You know, the Christian life bears more fruit. There is more things that you get out of the Christian life when we keep striking and we keep going. But for most of us, we stop. And God intends for us to live life to the fullest. He's given us these gifts. He's given us these opportunities. And he's placed like a unique calling on our life in this time. And very often we settle for just the average. The Christian life is not meant to be average at all. When I was in college, I applied for a job at group work camps, and this is where our kids go to in the summers. They go on mission trips there, and I've talked about this before because I ended up working at this place, but I didn't tell you about the first time that I applied for this place. I mean, you're given these opportunities to literally go to Colorado, get trained, and then travel all over the country setting up these camps. And then you run these camps of a $60,000 budget where you're working on houses, like 40 to 60 homes get fixed up in a neighborhood. And I would have been the person in charge of all the sites and all the labor and material going out to those sites. I was 20 years old. And they're like, it's a big opportunity. It's a big responsibility. I had to do 4 interviews, and they gave me the job. They said, it's yours. We want you to do this summer. Here's all the information you need to know and when you got to get out here by. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that's so much responsibility. I'm going to fail. And so the first year I got through all of that. They gave me the job, and I said, no, I can't do it. I will fail. I don't want to do that. And so I didn't do it. Luckily for me, God gave me another chance to do that. My quiver was filled with arrows waiting to be shot. And I was given a chance to shoot those. And let me tell you, it changed my life. You too may have lost out on your chance to shoot an arrow. But here's the thing about God. God always gives us new chances. You're never out of chances to keep shooting. Faith is more than just checking off a box that says, I believe in Jesus, and so I am going to heaven. Box checked. A lot of us fall into that category, that box checked. Oh, wait, I probably should start going to church too, pretty regularly, 2 times at least. Check. Oh, I probably should be a good person, right? Check. So the faith, the attendance, and being a good person, guess what that is? 3 arrows. It's enough, right? And there's nothing wrong with those. Those are great things. But the miracles happen on the 4th, the 5th, the 6th blow. You see, that's the funny thing about arrows. Arrows are meant to be shot. When you're going into battle, this is what Erwin McManus said in his book, when you're going into battle, you should never be the one that dies with arrows still in the quiver. And often we are living lives with arrows still in our quivers. We should not be dying with the arrows still there. Why are we not firing them? Because we're afraid. We're afraid that we'll fail. We're afraid that we'll look like an idiot or look different than everybody else. McManus calls it people who end their lives with quivers filled with untapped potential and unseized opportunities. We got a lot of unseized opportunities around here. God wants to live into our purpose in our lives. He's given you gifts. He's given you opportunities. And he wants to live into those gifts. But often, we tend to stop before our lives are unfinished. Our goal should become that we should come to the end of our lives and say, I left nothing on the table. I left nothing on the table. Arrows, they're not a decor. They're not something that you put on your wall. Arrows are meant to be shot. But very often, we treat our faith like a decor. We do it so often. Does this lead to potential failures? Heck yeah. It leads to a lot of failures. But I'd rather be the person that used the gifts that God gave me and failed than come to the end of my life with a quiver filled with arrows. We have a passage here. Jesus said these words in John 10:10. I come so that they may have life and have it to the full. Like, Jesus didn't come so that we can live average lives and do just enough. No, to the full. Like, I want you to get a lot out of this. That faith is just more than just stopping right here at enough. That 4, 5, 6 arrow, that's where the beauty is. That's where the amazing miracles are. But often we're stopping right at 3. In 1972, NASA launched this probe, Pioneer 10, 72. Now, the goal of this probe was to go to Jupiter and go around and do things of observing things of the rings and all sorts of things that I probably can't even explain to you of what the scientists know. Okay, and so they're supposed to go around and analyze all that data. And then they're shoot the data back to Earth, all right? Now, before that time, no probe went past Mars. And they were really worried that it was gonna get blasted by an asteroid belt or something. But so they made it, and here it goes. And by 1973, it actually got to Jupiter a year later, and then it went and it actually got shot out into the edge of the solar system. So this thing kept going and going. And then it eventually passed Saturn. And then it eventually, at some 2 billion miles from the sun, it passed Uranus. And then it passed Neptune. And it just kept going. It passed Pluto at 4 billion miles. By 1997, 25 years after they sent this probe out, it was more than 6 billion miles from the sun. It was like the satellite that could, right? Perhaps one of the most remarkable thing is that the transmitter was 8 watt, which is literally what a nightlight is, the same power. This thing just kept going. You know, we keep thinking that we're designed for such smaller missions in life. God is saying that there's so much more untapped in you, but you just haven't taken the arrow out yet. You know, you could be the person in this church that designs a mission that we do that changes lives in the world, in the communities around us. You could be that person that designs that literally changes lives for thousands of people, or more than that, because thousands is a very conservative number, right? Keep moving to the finish line. Don't stop striking, saying, this is enough. Because miracles are seen at 4, 5, and 6. You know, when I think of the first Christians in Rome, there's a lot to be said about those Christians, right? Now, a lot of them were being killed in the early times, right? And in the 4th century, they were being killed if they said that anybody that wasn't Caesar is Lord, you get killed in Rome. And so they were saying, of course, Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. And so they were bold. They didn't have a problem with saying that Jesus was Lord, even though that they could get killed for that. But at that time, they also were doing something else. They were doing things to get noticed. And it wasn't just like saying, you know, Jesus, follow Jesus. They were doing more than that. They were doing acts of hospitality that was so uncommon in that area. This is some of the things. They built hospitals in the 4th century. They forgave enemies. And nobody was doing that. They fed the hungry. They took in poor people that everyone else was shoving to the side. Nobody was taking care of poor people and widows. Like, nobody did that at that time. And they did all of that. And it got so weird because in the Roman brutal world, nobody was doing it. They stood out. And it's got to the point where Caesar Julian started getting worried. He started getting worried that they were actually going to take over Rome because everybody liked them so much. And so he offered a decree to his priests, and the priests were priests over lots of, gods and things like that. They had their own priests there. And he said, well, to the priests, you need to start acting like the Christians. Start doing good things for people. And they couldn't. They didn't do it. They didn't have the Holy Spirit like the Christians did, right? And so it just didn't work. And so then Caesar Julian said, okay, well, let's try something else. And so he started making up lies. And so they started saying that the Christians were feeding cake to children and then taking them as slaves, which was not true. It wasn't true at all. There's no history to back any of that up. They were actually feeding people. They were so scared of the Christians. They lived life so boldly that it made all of Rome change what they were doing because their hospitality was so big. See, those Christians did not leave any arrows in their quivers. My question for us today is, how are we doing? Do we stand out like that? Do we make people uncomfortable with our hospitality? Does our faith make people nervous? Do we even stand out, or do we look like everybody else? Man, this falls on me too. I mean, we're all like this, right? This is all of us. And I'm not talking about getting into political arguments where people, like those people in Rome, those Christians in Rome, they disagreed with the politics. Of course they did, right? They totally disagreed with the politics. But they stood out by their hospitality. They stood out with their love. That's what stood out. That's what people gathered. And then we're like, we want to be like those people, right? You know, sadly, it is actually seen with the universal church, like all churches, that the secular volunteers actually outserve us now. So we're not known for our hospitality anymore. We're known for other things. So we don't stand out in that way anymore. We have settled for an average faith, one that looks like 3 arrows. I think that this church is filled with untapped potential. It is filled with so many gifts, so much. We are right on the brink of hitting a new level to where we stand out, maybe for our hospitality, for our faith, right? A new level of spirituality and connection with Jesus, a new level of compassion, a new level of what God intends for us to be. And we just can't settle for average. Because guess what? Miracles don't happen in the average faith. They happen in the 4th, the 5th, the 6th blow. God wants to see what can happen. And the fruit comes out of those places. Years ago, I met a man, and he worked with children in the prison system. You see, there was kids who did such horrendous things that even their parents and their families abandoned them. They didn't want any part of them, so they let them just go to prison, and that was the rest of their life because the parents didn't want to be associated with these kids anymore. And at their trial, my friend who was a chaplain in that prison system, he decided that he was going to stand with them as like their parent. And he stood by them because no one was standing with these children. And he got death threats. He got death threats to his family, but he kept going. He kept standing with these children in the worst moment of their lives because no one else would. And he felt like that is the place that Jesus would stand, is right next to these children. I haven't talked to this friend in years, but I could only imagine the amount of children that were shown Jesus because a man who was a chaplain decided to stand with them in the worst moment of their life and then keep visiting them and be in relationship with them and point them to a relationship with Jesus. You see, I consider that kind of faith not average. I consider that kind of faith the 4th, the 5th, the 6th blow, where there's fruit that comes from it. There is so much more. I'm going to invite the band to come on up.